Hi, and welcome to a new retrospective where today I'm going to do something a little bit different and talk about classic gaming magazines from the early 90s, in particular magazines which I sort of first started buying back in the day when I had my Commodore 64, and kind of talk about the reason why I used to get so excited every month about picking them up, um, and the impact they sort of had really, and kind of the reasons why I got excited. Now, back in the day, the first sort of magazine. So back in the early 90s, 1990, 91, I didn't really get any magazines at all. It was mostly kind of just going to second-hand shops to discover games. Um, my mum one day when I come home from school, she picked up this new magazine called Let's Compute, which you can see here. Because it was only 99p, it was quite cheap, and it was like a comic book sort of kid-friendly magazine, which she thought I might be able to kind of get something from, and I really enjoyed it. It was a kind of fairly short-lived magazine, um, and what I'm going to do is kind of give you a bit of a tour through a lot of the magazines that I started reading, and just sort of the excitement and build-up that I used to get for getting every issue. And this is what I kind of started with. This is where it all began, really. So, Mum bought me one of these magazines as an issue, and it's kind of like it's sort of comic book straight educational gaming magazine. It's a very strange sort of hybrid type thing, and didn't really get that popular, unfortunately. And maybe that's because of the educational spin on it. As you can see, it's sort of aimed at 7 to 14-year-olds in general. And the main thing about it was that it kind of teaches you how to do programming. So this particular page here is something called Snakes Alive, which I remember typing in back in the day. It's one of the first typings that I did, and it's just a basic game, really. It's the main listing is BBC Micro based, and then you'd get different formats here where you could change certain lines to make it run on your machine, and that's why it's kept simple. But even though it's quite a simple game, the when you actually got something typed in and saw it working for the first time, it was really exciting. It was kind of a big achievement, really. And the fun thing was afterwards is that the part of the magazine here, it would tell you about what certain lines did what, so you could actually go in, make changes to the game to maybe add joystick controls or make it harder and add title screens and that kind of thing. And it encouraged me to do exactly that. I mean, it got me to add to do my own version of the game in later years, just with sound effects and bits and pieces, which I think is on my online archive on my discs and stuff. So that was pretty cool. But the rest of the magazine was mostly just educational content. There was like something here where it allows you to kind of build your own joystick, which I'd never really. It's completely over my head, really. I didn't do a lot of reading back then. I was more of a visual sort of person. But there's some fairly decent stuff in here looking back. I mean, you got this Rom and Ram section, which was a comic strip with two characters who are the main two characters for the magazine, and they kind of, as they talk through, they kind of drop in bits of programming to kind of teach you programming or give you little snippets, which was kind of quite ingenious, really, if you think about it. But it's a shame, really, it didn't really take off. Maybe if they tried to sell it to schools, it might have done a bit better. They got a little game scan section, which is kind of giving news about new games coming out, and a couple of cheats and tips as well, but not a huge amount. There's a build your own database, calendar you can construct. Quite a lot of typings, really, and that kind of emphasis on learning as you type. There is a sort of a small roundup on like new games that were coming out at the time, which give you a bit of an indication of what was coming out. Not massive, not a huge amount about it. The focus really wasn't on new games that were coming out. That wasn't the main purpose, really. But this was the bit I was most excited about, unfortunately. So there's an indication that this possibly wasn't the right magazine for me. But regardless, I'd buy this quite a few issues, because I kind of enjoyed it at the time. I enjoyed the typing aspect of it. I remember this one in particular. I thought strangely it was going to be some kind of cool biking game, and being really disappointed. It was just like some kind of calculator. In the end, it wasn't anything spectacular at all. The painting program, I think I typed that one in as well. Yeah, as you see, there's a lot of adverts for sort of educational software and bits and pieces, and something for Acorn Archimedes being advertised. It was kind of, it did have a heavy BBC Micro sort of Acorn focus to it, really. I don't know if that was deliberate. I mean, here's a comic strip which is teaching you or doing bits of logo programming, which I couldn't do because I didn't have logo on the 64. Yeah, I'd buy this for quite a few issues. I wanted to join a subscription club. It was too expensive. At sort of an advert for Software City. I think I actually ordered off this for the very first time. Got Wonder Boy and Top Gun for my Christmas money, that kind of thing. It was a good little magazine, really, and as it was only 99p, it was something I could pick up. I wasn't sort of picking it up every single month. I'd literally go into the shop, and if I saw it on the shop shelf, then I'd pick it up. There's one particular thing in this issue here. They kind of started a regular thing, which was quite common in old magazines, where they'd have like a part, something broken up into several parts, and this was like something I started to get into. It's building your own adventure game. I'll show you, should be in here somewhere. Probably not going to find it now. Is it in the next one? Okay, it doesn't matter. It was this one actually. This is wrong issue. So in this particular issue that I got, they started something about building your own adventure game, and I was kind of quite enjoyed The Hobbit and Valhalla, so I was quite keen to type this in and try and get into it myself. So I started typing in each part and getting it all ready, and yeah, the good thing about this, I think this would work on all the different formats. You didn't really have to change any lines, which is quite cool. So that's quite useful. So you type in that first part, and then I'd start trying to get the second part. So it was really important to try and pick up the next parts to pick up. And I think I did about 2 parts in total, and then got to the third part. It was a particular issue. Yeah, this one here. So, very short story. So basically, I don't know if you see those magazines that they sell in the shops, where the first issue is 99p, and you get like, it's like Constructor Battleship or something. You get the first part 99p, and then but the subsequent parts, the next 140 parts you have to collect, cost £10.99 each, and in the end you end up spending over £1,000 for something which probably only cost about less than 100 quid. My mum used to do this thing where she would buy like the first issue of something for 99p, so I'd get a part of something, like a bit of a spider's leg for a 3D spider, but then when it came to the next issue, she said, "Oh, I'm not paying £10.99 for that, so that's that." So I'd end up with all these unfinished projects, and I'd had this like glow-in-the-dark spider's leg sat on the side of my shelf for years, not exactly knowing why I got it. Something similar happened to this actually, because I was buying this every month, and my mum was helping me to buy it, and basically this issue had come out, saw it on the shelf, and I said to Mum, "Oh Mum, can I get it? Because I'm typing this adventure program in, it's the next part." And I think I must have been playing her up at the time, so I was hyperactive and must have really wound her up or something, and she said, "No, you're not having it," and that was that. And I was kind of gutted really, because I couldn't finish the adventure game, but also there was a Pac-Man game in it which looked really cool, and I was quite excited about typing it in, and I never got to do it, unfortunately. But I think, is it in there somewhere? So I'll show it quickly. It probably wasn't much, because if it's anything like Snake Awake or Snake Alive, it was probably just going to be a very simple character based. There's the third part I never got to type in. Should probably do that now actually. So these magazines, I picked them up off eBay in later years. The reason for that, which I'll tell you that in a minute, why I don't have my original ones. It's a bit gross. So yeah, this is the Pac-Man game, so it's a longer script. Not much to change to get it working on the 64, but the maze is very simple, so it probably was just going to be a very simple character-based Pac-Man, and not very good. But anyway, yeah. So I did have quite a few of these magazines at the time. Problem was, I didn't get to keep them all in the end, and I had to repurchase them in later years, because basically I had them stacked next to my bed one night, and I got very ill one evening and leant over the side of my bed and just vomited over the whole pile, and that was the end of them. Completely gone. Couldn't salvage them at all. I think the only one that survived was this last copy, without its inlay, and that's all I've got now. So yeah, This ended up actually being, I think, the very last issue. I've never seen an issue 13 at all. This is when Europress Impact, I think, became the publisher. I don't know if they took over or they database publications, I think, turned into Europress Impact or something. This one I kind of remember, obviously because I still got it, I remember it quite fondly, but one of the good benefits of this particular magazine, which really helped me out, is because I was massively into the Dizzy games at the time. But the problem was I didn't know what other Dizzy games were out there. I had the original Dizzy and Fantasy World Dizzy, but I didn't know Treasure Island Dizzy existed, for instance, because there was no internet to look it up, and I didn't get magazines all the time. This particular issue reviewed Magic Land Dizzy, and that was the first time I ever heard that there was another one out there. So I remember saving up my money thanks to this issue, going down to John Menzies to buy it, and actually become my favourite Dizzy game of all time. It was a bit sad actually, because I tried looking for the next issue after this one, because at the end they were advertising about building your own action-packed game, and that was something I was starting to get into. I wanted to kind of get into programming and do my own stuff like that, so I was hoping that was going to kind of really kickstart it, and when it never turned up, that was it really. But I wasn't really, as I say, I wasn't getting magazines on a monthly basis at that stage all the time. It's just as and when really, if I was good or if I had a pound coin or something to pick it up. But when that disappeared, I didn't really get anything after that for a while, and it wasn't until sort of August in 1991 that I went into a magazine shop and started buying this other magazine. But before that, in the magazine shops at the time, I started seeing what was out there, and I used to get quite attracted to various magazines that I saw, and the main reason was because of the cover mounts that used to get on the front. And I remember going into the shops at the time and seeing this magazine called 64 Fun, which is a really obscure and short-lived magazine that came out during 1991. I think it came out went into about 1992, I think. They basically had 3 versions of the magazine. You had 64 Fun, ST Fun, and Amiga Fun, and essentially it was the same magazine, just with a different cover and a different cover mount, and the content was mostly recycled across the 3 magazines. So what you ended up buying was what you thought was a C64 magazine, but which essentially had 16-bit content mixed in with your 8-bit content. So there was a lot of stuff you'd have to kind of skip through. The other thing as well is that the magazines, they weren't particularly great. The content was a bit dire. Looking back now, it wasn't that great. The formatting of the pages was not very inspiring at all, and that kind of thing. But I didn't really look at the content back then at all. It wasn't the content that drew me in. It was the cover mount tapes, and I used to see these quite a lot. Sort of unwittingly at the time in the second-hand shops, I used to buy these. I used to find these in the shops second-hand, and I didn't really realise that they were magazine cover tapes. These were kind of I thought they were kind of proper full releases that had just got this one. I thought it just lost its inlay, for instance. I thought this was a full price game that was released. I didn't realise it was part of a magazine. So I'd already been picking up these magazine cover tapes, but when I went into newsagents, I started seeing magazines with sellotapes to the front, and I used to think that was really cool. But often the magazines were a little bit of money, so I couldn't just go in and buy it like Let's Compute at 99p. Because they had a tape on the front, they were priced up quite a bit more, closer to a budget sort of price, which was very good, but I didn't have that money sort of readily available to make a instant purchase. And 64 Fun was one of those magazines that I'd see, and the game that they would often give away, or the games they give away, looked absolutely fantastic. So this one I remember very well, with the Last Warrior on the front, was a Operation Wolf game. And the big thing about this magazine that made it so good was the fact that the games that they got were imported from Germany, from their disc magazine. So this is I think this is the first magazine to really do it in the UK, and sadly, because the content was shit, it didn't take off. But it was great for that reason. So The Last Warrior was actually not called The Last Warrior at all. It was actually No Mercy. That was what it's called. Yeah, No Mercy. And I remember seeing the tape on the front coming away when the sellotape wasn't sellotaped on very well, and I was so tempted because I didn't have the money. I just wanted to snag the tape quickly and sort of run off with it, but I didn't. And that was the only reason, if you bought this magazine, was for that fact, was to get those games you would never otherwise get. You wouldn't ever see them on the shelves or in a second-hand shop in the UK. That you had to get them imported from Germany, and this was doing it for you. So it was a shame it wasn't done properly, because I think that could have been really good. So yeah, it was. I didn't start properly getting a magazine until 1991, and it was this particular magazine, Commodore Format issue 11, that kind of kick-started it all for me, really. And it was back in August 1991, and my next door neighbours were these two girls that I used to hang out with occasionally, and we had a bit of pocket money between us, and we decided to go down to a sweet shop called Dio's, and this is what I'll show you now. So this is what used to be a place called Dio's. It's now a different rebranded shop. There used to be a front entrance here that, as you kind of went in, there'd be a magazine rack at the back with all the magazines out. And as the girls were kind of getting their pick and mix, before I started looking at sweets, I went and had a look at the magazine rack and see if they had any Commodore magazines. And this stood out mainly because of the banner at the top. So you had this kind of prominent red and white banner that just said Commodore, and that kind of drew me straight away. And it's when I kind of discovered that that's where the power packs come from. So that issue 7, which I previously picked up in a second-hand shop, I realised that's what originally where they come from. It actually come from a magazine. So I thought, that's really cool. So that piqued my interest straight away. But I started flicking through, and as I say, I was massively into the Dizzy games at the time. I was playing Magic Land Dizzy now, because thanks to Let's Compute, but I'd been playing Fantasy World Dizzy and hadn't got very far. And it wasn't until as I was flicking to the cheat section, I got to a cheat section, and first of all there was a cheat for Robocop where if you held down these keys you could make him fly, and I thought that was really cool, and I was trying to memorise it, thinking I wasn't going to get this magazine. I was probably going to have to just memorise this cheat and take it home. But then all that changed when I suddenly flicked over the page, and then staring me in the face was this amazing map for all of Fantasy World Dizzy. And it was at the time, that was completely mind-blowing. Just having the entire game opened up in front of me. So at the time, pre-internet and pre-spoiler alerts, I used to have to. There was no one else who really played the game. There was a kid that I used to see at my dad's pigeon club once a week, and he had an Amstrad CPC, and he had Fantasy World Dizzy. When I used to get stuck on a particular screen, he would tell me how to get past it. So then I'd run home, follow his advice, get past that screen, but then I'd get stuck on another screen straight away, and I'd have to wait an entire week to go and catch up with this guide to see what the next part was. But here in the magazine was the entire game just opened up, and with a complete solution, tell me how to finish it. And back then, as a 8 or 9-year-old kid, that was extremely exciting. It was, even though it kind of acted as a spoiler, I could see what was at the end. I didn't know what the end sequence was like, and I wanted to see these screens for myself. There was still excitement about it. I say the big thing about Dizzy was that if you got stuck on a particular screen at a certain point, and you wanted to know what was over on the other side, I used to kind of daydream about it as a kid. I used to imagine what might be there, if there was maybe a hoard of treasure or something, some amazing character you'd interact with. It used to get me quite excited about those kind of games. That's why I love Dizzy so much. And this kind of showed me what was beyond those certain points, but I still wanted to play through it for myself and see those screens. So this kind of gave me a great way of doing it. So I was kind of sold straight away. I now needed to buy this magazine so I could take the map home and play the game. I couldn't just memorise the map in my head. I had luckily £2 on me at the time, but it was 20p short for the cost, so I had to run home. The girls didn't have any spare money. They'd spent it on their sweet straight away, so I had to run home, rush the girls home quickly, and then beg, borrow and steal an extra 20p to go and run back down and get it. And this kind of started a sort of a love affair for the magazine, really. Me starting to, and magazines in general, to start buying magazines on a monthly basis. After this point, I wanted to get this every month, and the main reason for that wasn't just the map, it was the cover mount and what you got on the tape. The fact that I knew that I'd get this tape every month with brand new stuff on it was quite exciting. So as well as the cheat section, it was like kind of flicking through, seeing Pitfall 2 for the first time. I didn't know who David Crane was. I didn't know what Pitfall games were. This was the first time I'd ever seen it. All I saw was like an adventure exploration game where you go swimming and where you go through this jungle collecting gold and other various bits. It just looked really appealing to me, and I wasn't let down when I played it. I absolutely loved the game and played it for hours on end. Switchblade, an amazing demo that they gave away with some fantastic music by Ben Daglish. It was only a small snippet of that game, but it was enough to kind of entice me to want to go out and buy the full price game. Lightforce, another game I didn't have, wasn't the most amazing game in the world. I didn't really get too attached to it, but I loved the Rob Hubbard music and the title screen effects on it, and Over the Net was a neat little demo of a volleyball game. And all that for £2.20. It was just fantastic. The good thing about it, because Let's Compute was a multi-format magazine, this was purely C64, and everything you had in it was 64 based. The previews also gave an indication of what was coming out, so for the first time I had a really good idea what games to look out for that were coming out. So Rodland I'd see was this amazing looking game which I was going to fall in love with in later months. Speedball 2, another fantastic game. All thanks to this magazine I was starting to learn about it. You had this early warning scanner, which was an amazing invention by the magazine, which kind of give you indication that games that were close to the centre were games that were due to be released. Wasn't always accurate, but it was a good, lovely visual way of seeing what was coming up and what was going to be coming out on the platform. And the reviews themselves, they're really nicely broken down. I wasn't a massive reader back in the day. I was more of a visual person, so I wouldn't read that entire review. So the good thing about the reviews is that they break things down into lots of screenshots, lots of visuals and comments that I could quickly read and get a feel for the game. Plus they had this uppers and downers section which would break down the game very neatly to explain what was good and what was bad about it. It was just very well done, and it was perfect for kids of my age, but also adults as well. It would appeal to both age groups. It wasn't too childlike. And then of course the cheat section, which I've already mentioned, was a large cheat section, but also had type-ins as well as the maps as well, which were a lot of fun to kind of type in and try out, and certain games I was stuck on. The other good thing as well in it was the budget section, which was the Roger Frames buys budget games, and that was a favourite feature of mine, which I used to read every month quite avidly, because it was this was mostly the type of games I got. So I mostly got budget games because of the amount of funds I had. So this was really important to kind of spell out that Red Heat was not worth the money, and Leadstorm probably was worth the money. Roger Frames didn't always appeal to everyone, but Mike Roberts' comic strip was really good every month. I used to quite like how he tied the comic strips into the theme, into the games that were being covered. So you've got like Arnie from Red Heat there, and Ghostbusters 2 theme there. It was quite fun and light-hearted, and it was a shame when they eventually sort of got rid of that character. And then the rest of it was kind of, there's a bit of basic programming stuff in there. There's Mighty Brain has a letters section, a couple of specials in there. It's a little How to Make Games by Martin Walker. And then kind of leading up to the next month bit, and because I kind of got this magazine quite late, issue 12 was literally about a week away, so I had to kind of quickly gather the money together to sort of quickly purchase it. It's from that point I decided I want because I saw what was coming out on the tape, and it was quite exciting. I decided I wanted to kind of get this every month, so I kind of spoke to my parents and said, how can I get more pocket money, or how can I maybe get this magazine every month? And they agreed to sort of buy it for me each month and get it put by at the shop, as long as I was able to kind of do extra chores around the house, so like do hoovering every weekend or do the washing up every day, that kind of thing. And I would do that so I could get this magazine every month. And I remember issue 12 was another great issue with the Commodore format demo, and the Speedball 2 demo and PP Hammer. It was really cool, and it started my sort of monthly pilgrimage to get the magazine. Just to show you how much the magazine really caught on for me, here's a slightly embarrassing photo of me back in August 1991, and next to me is, that's me in the middle if you haven't guessed already, sporting hair, which I don't these days, next to my older brother who was in the army at the time. He'd come back to visit for about a week, And he picked up my sister and my nephew and my mum. That's my nephew there. And we went over to visit my nan. And for some reason, I decided to take both my magazines, take along with me, because I just kept reading them from cover to cover at the time. I just absolutely loved them. And at the end, decided to take a picture of us as a group. And for some bizarre reason, I don't fully know why, I just turned around and said, "Oh, can I hold my magazines in the picture?" I wanted to hold my magazines up to show in the picture. But that kind of sums up how much I was really sort of loved the magazine at the time. Very bizarre, but there you go. So I used to start getting the magazine on a monthly basis from this shop here. So they used to put it by for me, and it kind of started up this regular pilgrimage on a monthly basis. So that's where the shop was. This is where my parents live, and this is where I used to live as well. So back in 1991, there used to be like a disused coal yard. So it's a housing estate now. So we used to use this as a shortcut to get into town. Essentially, we used to cut through this disused bit of land. My dad used to use it all the time. And what I used to do is I used to go to that sweet shop once a month at 7 o'clock in the morning for as soon as they opened, to go and get my magazine when it was due out. And I used to literally cut down from my house through this grassy path, down through this disused coal yard, straight down and to the sweet shop here. And I used to do that every month, and I used to literally sprint when the magazine was out, because I'd be so excited to see what was going to be on the front of the cover, and see what tape was going to be released. And yeah, basically what I'm going to show now is these are some of the issues that I would pick up over the years and the months that followed. And it was just getting up at 7 and running down when the magazine was due out. It was the anticipation of going in the shop, seeing this on the shelf with a big red banner, and then straight away focusing on the tape and then seeing what was going to be on there. What would I be playing today? And issue 13 is one of my favourites, along with 16 and 17 that I'm just going to show. And this one in particular, I had the 2 full games already, but the demos in particular were just as exciting sometimes. It would give you a bit of a glimpse of a new game, just a bit of a flavour, and it would build that anticipation up of maybe saving up and trying to purchase it as a full price game. So Turbocharge is possibly one of the best racing games ever on the C64 at the moment, and it was basically what Chase HQ should have been. And I remember absolutely falling in love with this game from this demo, and you would complete the level and you'd have to kind of restart the entire game to load it in again to be able to play it again. So I'd have to keep resetting and reloading just to keep playing it over and over. And I remember it wasn't until it came out on budget that I eventually got it, but yeah, it was really exciting just to see what new stuff was coming out. And Rolling Ronnie was another one. It was, what I loved about this one is, as you were loading the game, you'd be looking at this map. So they'd done this really clever thing with the screenshots. They built up the map so you could see a big section of the game in one go, and it was something they used to do quite a lot in Commodore format. Rolling Ronnie had these amazing graphics in it, and also this lovely tune that would play throughout the game. And although I couldn't find the full price game because it was incredibly hard to find, I used to play the demo quite a lot, and every time I hear that music on the first level, it takes me back exactly to those golden sort of sunshine late summer months back then when the magazine was out. So later issues, this was another one that was very exciting to pick up at the time, and the main reason was that you had 2 tapes given away on the front, which was fairly unheard of at the time. I think the Spectrum magazines had just started doing it because the Spectrum was dying out. This one was a bit of a shock because I had to sort of run back home quickly because I got down there and realised I was 75p short. It wasn't the usual £2.20, but it was a good reason to run back and get some extra money because you had 2 tapes instead of 1. Unfortunately, I already had the Graphic Adventure Creator, but the other tape had more than enough on it to kind of make up for that. So you had 2 full prices and 2 budget games, which was the norm. Mission Impossible was another new one which I hadn't got. First Samurai was a fantastic demo, a massive great big level that you could play through, give you a real good flavour for the game, and really wanted me to make me go out and buy it. unfortunately, with ImageWorks, they kind of went under before it could properly get released. So Robert Maxwell had fell off his boat and disappeared. So the company, which was owned by him through Mirrorsoft, was kind of no more essentially. So it wasn't for another year or so until that finally got released. Creatures 2, another amazing game. I mean, we were really spoiled during this time. I was very lucky to be around with the 64 during this time, because the games were still in the shops, this platform was still relevant, and we got great games like this, which I was lucky to experience. Head the Ball, the full game on there, the other full game, which was a really hard platformer, but very, very good. So it was another great month. But the issue which really I remember very fondly, apart from issue 11 and 12, is issue 17. Because I can remember specifically, I can remember very clearly running down to get this particular issue, and it being, I think it's pitch black at about 6:45 in the morning, being pitch black dark, and I was running through that coal tip along that route that I've showed you, and getting to the shop and seeing a magazine on the shelf with the red logo, and then staring straight at the cover and seeing Battle Valley and Cyberdyne Warrior, and Sensitive as well in the other games. But mainly the main two, Battle Valley and Cyberdyne Warrior, these two sort of army looking games, which didn't fully know what they were, never heard of them before, but very excited to see what they were going to be about. I remember just as I was coming home, trying to walk back through the coal tip, it's still dark, the sun was just starting to come up now, and I'm trying to read these pages, trying to see what the games are going to be about, and getting so excited about it. And when I eventually got home, it's time to get ready for school. Now, there was no time to load them up or anything like that, so I had to literally go to primary school, and I'd be daydreaming about the games all day, and be just anticipating running home and playing them. They were absolutely great. I mean, Cyberdyne Warrior is a lovely, lovely game. Which I think it was only released on a compilation at the time. I don't think it was released as standalone, and that was got by the Apex brothers, who did Creatures and later Mayhem on Monsterland. It was the prequel to Retrograde, essentially, that Thalamus later released. That was a really cool game. I spent a lot of time on that, but Battle Valley was the main one, which I spent a lot longer on. It was this game where you had to kind of destroy this missile at the far end of the map, and there's lots of things to destroy, lovely parallax scrolling, and a fantastic tune by Jerome Tell, one of his early tunes, commercial tunes that was released. It was like a 10-minute epic. And essentially you'd have this tank, and you get to a bridge which had a hole in it, and what you had to do is use the helicopter to take off a bit of a roof off a building to bridge the gap so the tank could get across. And it's such a cool game, and it was only a budget title really, released by Racket, which is Houston's budget label, and I just absolutely loved it. It was kind of Racket and Houston done some fantastic games, and released on their budget label, which could have been full price. This was one of them, and Samsara was another one, which was ironically released on Commodore Format's tapes. I think Commodore Format struck up a deal with Houston at the time. Oh, and of course, how could I forget Sensitive? I wasn't a massive puzzle game fan at the time, but really got into this one. And actually, this shouldn't have been on there at all. This was this has been a PD game, and was actually a commercial game. It was released in Germany on the Disc magazine, and even had the crack intro still tucked away in the code. So Commodore Format had to probably pay them afterwards for that. But yeah, I was massively into the magazine at the time. So Commodore Format was my sort of first love magazine wise, and that was the first sort of regular magazine I started purchasing. But I did kind of pick up other magazines along the way as well. I'll kind of talk about some of them in a moment. So one of the other magazines that I started buying was Zap 64. So this was actually this came out roughly about the same time as Commodore Format. Issue 11, so I think I must have had a bit of windfall money. Maybe I went to visit an aunt and they gave me a £5 note or something. But I remember seeing this in the shop, and it had another cool cover mount tape, so I just instantly picked it up for £2.20 again. And the main thing that kind of drew me in, it's very similar to Commodore Format, which is kind of ironic really, because I think Zap 64, when Commodore Format came out, Zap had already been going for quite a long time, since 1985, and I think it knocked the stuffing out of him a little bit, and Zap probably borrowed a little bit from Commodore format and their style. So there are bits that are similar. There's a lot of similar content because it was the same kind of month as well. The cover tape wasn't quite as exciting as Commodore formats. Doondark's Revenge was a fantastic game, and actually, if you're into RPGs, then this was an amazing title to have given away. But I wasn't massively into this kind of game at all, so it drifted past me, unfortunately, and I feel quite bad for saying that. Terminator 2 was very exciting because I loved the look of the film and Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, so the demo is great. Nice bit of the beat 'em up level to play. Spy vs Spy I quite enjoyed to a point. I didn't really fully understand what I was doing. I didn't bother reading instructions. I was quite like that and lazy. Often what I would do is let the computer player collect most of the objects, and I'd kill them at the end and steal it off them and then get the plane. And I remember when the plane escaped at the end, I'd be kind of hoping that there was a bit more to the game. You'd maybe play a level where you're in the aeroplane shooting things or something, but it wasn't quite like that. And then you had a kind of a reader's game called Game Master, which was fairly forgettable, sort of bat and ball game, very odd music on the front. The magazine itself I thought was pretty decent. I mean, compared to one of the others that I'm going to show you in a bit. Enough so that I thought it'd be really cool, actually, because the cover mounts were different. There was a different set of games. Wouldn't it be great just for a little bit more than the price of a budget game to maybe try and push and get 2 magazines each month? So yeah, I was quite drawn in by it. But when I went to buy the next issue of this, I found that I couldn't, because it didn't exist. Newsfield at this time had gone bust, so the next issue of the magazine never made it to the shelves. And that seems I seem to have a bit of a curse, because the other magazine that I'm going to look at in a bit had the same kind of thing. I think I bought, and it had the Terminator 2 on the cover as well. That sort of disappeared straight after I bought it. Luckily though with Zap, although I missed an issue or two, when I went back in the shop, I started to discover it again on the shop shelves. So I started to sort of buy it on a regular basis. So I'd get later. This is one of the later issues. This is one of my originals, which you can tell because it's in such a poor condition, not been looked after. This used to be in my school bag, take it into school and that kind of thing. But it'll carry on the trend, really. The great sort of cover mount games. Eventually, the magazine got extended, and they widened the issues, and they also started putting 2 tapes on the front of the magazine, which for me was absolutely fantastic, because that's what I loved about the magazine. So more tapes on the front, more games, was great. But the thing that I noticed back then, so this is about what date is this? It's just late 1992, so November. At this time, there was still C64 games being sold in the shops, just about, but the shelf space has started to reduce at this point, and I started to notice it and think, what's going on? Because I kind of thought back then that 64 might go on forever, even though the Mega Drive was just coming out and there was the Amiga and stuff. I was thinking, no, I didn't really think that the 64 could become obsolete. One of the kind of signs of it really was in this issue, they started to put like proper big commercial games that had only been released maybe a year or 2 before. They kind of did on Commodore format to a point, but these were quite large, big, massive games. Silkworm and Ninja Warriors were arcade conversions, and they were releasing it on a magazine cover. I mean, I didn't mind too much because I was getting the game. Although I had those games, it was quite anyone else. It was quite a big thing, really. You was only paying, what was it? Still less than the budget game to get all of these games, essentially, for nothing with the magazine. And you had a couple of reader games as well. So you had Breakdown, which was quite a neat, a simple but neat game by Frederick Blom, and then you had Frenzy as well, which was a neat puzzle game as well. But the big thing about this particular issue, so I was getting Commodore format at the same time, and I was buying now Zap on a monthly basis. Zap were about to change. I didn't really understand why a lot of people were upset about this, because I didn't really understand about the heritage of Zap 64 and how important it was at the time, because I was such a latecomer. They were getting a rebrand, so in the magazine they were, as you can see a bit earlier on, they did other magazines, the Sega Force. I think it's in here, or maybe not. They're doing Sega Force and other Force-themed magazines, so they decided to kind of, as a rebranding exercise, that the next issue of Zap 64 was going to be Commodore Force instead. So it's a proper rebranding exercise to try and save them time and resources and that kind of thing, which kind of made sense. But to people who grew up with Zap 64 since the sort of 1985, it was quite sad, really. It was the end of an era, and a lot of people were against it. For me, I didn't care at the time because I didn't really have that attachment to the early Zap issues. The thing that really excited me was that the new issue, they were promising this, which you can see here. So they were promising Lemmings. So at the time I've been playing Lemmings on the Amiga, and I really desperately wanted to see a 64 conversion. And here was a C64 screenshot, and they were going to have the demo on the next issue. So I was really excited, and I remember Mum bringing this home next month. I remember getting home, and this was the new Commodore Force, the new rebranded issue. So same kind of thing, same size as the old Zap, 2 tapes on the front. This particular one was in a cellophane bag, all sealed up, so you couldn't read through it. And it had a free copy. It had this tips book that come with it as well. So it was a great issue. I was quite excited, and it's a brand new magazine really to start and enjoy. And I quite enjoyed it. I know a lot of people didn't like Commodore Force, maybe a bit garish. They were trying to copy a lot more of what Commodore Format were doing. I think it was good. I think it was a good magazine, and I quite the problem was there was not a lot to cover. The 64 games were starting to dwindle now, so there was a lot of crap written up to kind of fill the pages. But the main thing still for me was the cover mount, and there was still a lot of nice games to play. Fruit Bank in this issue I really enjoyed, and Gemini Wing I absolutely loved. And these are major games that are being given away. But then of course you had Lemmings on the tape as well, which was the big pull. That was the reason why I was keen to get that issue. The rest of the magazine was mostly Zap 64 essentially, just with different bits of different branding on it. Back then, as the games were dwindling, there was less to review. They did a lot more retrospective, so we started to see features on beat 'em ups and that kind of thing. But these were kind of good for me because they gave me a kind of a look at what other games are out there which I might not have been aware of that I could go out and try and purchase. So they were quite handy. But as we get to the cheat sections, used to start to increase. They got a little bit better when it got rebranded. They started to have more of a focus on budget games. Got Public Sector there. Actually reminds me, I'm going to show you something in Zap which is quite dodgy. I'll go back a second. There was more kind of focus on the budget titles and compilations. Apart from, there's a Codemasters game full price in there, one of the last Dizzy games, the last 64 Dizzy game to come out, which was really cool. I remember getting that at Christmas. Yeah, so budget games. Well, they used to get small little segments back in the old Zap, but now they were getting like whole pages of for the reviews. And that was kind of, there's less to review, there's less full prices coming out now. Ocean were about to kind of completely abandon the 64 and that kind of thing, and yeah, magazine was starting to shrink as well, and that was a sign of what was to come really. Yeah, before I jump onto that, I think it's in this one. Really quickly, as I was going through, I noticed this section. I think it's in the Zap magazine. Yep. Okay, so I completely passed this by. So something I noticed, I thought I'd show you really quickly, which is quite funny. Slightly dodgy, I don't know how they got away with it. So they got a section in there called PD file. And try saying that really quickly. This is a PD section they had in Zap, but Zap were going for a bit of a bad phase at the time. They had a person who wrote their letters pages called Miss Whiplash, and they had this kind of whole theme about it where they were trying to be a bit crude. So they got rid of her then. I don't think she was in. She wasn't in here at the time. It might have been Lucy Hickman who started it, but yeah, they got PD file in there, which I thought was very dodge. But anyway, Commodore format. That kind of, as like with Commodore 4 say, that kind of started to shrink as well. that would keep shrinking over many years. Commodore Force eventually sort of disappeared after a certain issue because the publisher went bust, but they'd already started to shrink. By the time we kind of got to 1994, the Commodore format become unrecognisable. About a couple of years before, they'd already had a rebranding, so the logo completely changed, and it become quite garish. This garish new design, which hasn't aged very well at all, and I didn't enjoy it even back then. But it was something they felt they had to do to kind of make it easier to produce all their magazines, keep it in the same sort of branding. But yeah, as we saw, the budget games, it was only budget games that eventually got reviewed and the full prices disappeared, but then the budget games disappeared too. The shelf space then completely disappeared, and then all of a sudden there was nothing to be reviewed in the magazines. So the magazines, they lost advertising, they lost readers as well. People started to upgrade their machines now. They went to the SNES and the Mega Drive, and we were left with this. The people who stuck by the 64 and kept going, we got this magazine that kept increasing in price but kept decreasing in page content. But it was good in a way, because what they managed to cram into, like, was it 22 pages in the end? Yeah, 22 pages, which was nothing, and made it into a comic book essentially. They crammed in a lot of good content, what was there, but there wasn't a huge amount to cover anyway. There was no new games coming out. Again, the magazine kept the theme of putting games that had only just come out on the tape. We started to get these brand new games, which people, because there was no games being sold in the shops, we had to rely on people making them and selling them by mail order. And this was the start of a small sort of mini resurgence about this time. So we had like companies like Electric Boys and Cytronic releasing games, and Visualize as well, releasing new games. You had to send off with mail order to get them. But although they tried really hard, it wasn't enough. People just started to move on. They started to get the PlayStation and SNES and Mega Drive and that was it. There was only the few of us who still kept hold of our 64 and kept buying a magazine that kept the magazine going. And it's really amazing that this magazine lasted as long as it did, really. But it was kind of sad in a way, because I got this magazine right to the end, and it was just kind of a sad shadow of itself back from when I got issue 11, really. But that's the way it goes. Time moves on, and platforms fade and they disappear. And I mean, the advert on the back of there was a sign of what was coming up. This was the future, and Commodore 64 wasn't part of it. But ironically, thanks to the internet, and there's a new resurgence and new games that are constantly coming out, so it all turned out good in the end. Okay, just to show you some other magazines that I got around about the time. There was this magazine that I picked up back in the second-hand shop around about the same time as Commodore format. So this came with another cover mount, and this was like a one-off magazine that they brought out, and it had some great games on the front. Firefly and Tarantua were two full games, which were quite cool, and he had like rolling demos of ninja games. I think this was brought out because of the GS, so the 64 had a brief flutter of interest and there was opportunity to make some money, so I did this sort of new magazine with some new games to check out on the cover tape. Firefly was really good. Tarantua not so much. I love Firefly because of its music by Fred Gray. This kind of did a couple of new reviews of some of the current games that have come out, but the main thing at the end, and the main purpose of the magazine, once you get past the cheats, is this games directory bit at the end, which I kind of used as a bible for quite a few years, so pre-internet days again, so I didn't know what software was out there. This acted as a really good sort of guide for when I was trawling the second-hand shops, or even the shop shelves at the time, to see what was out. So Nebulous I'd never heard of, it completely passed me by, so that was something to look out for. Samsara, I was lucky enough to play on Power Pack 9 for Commodore format, so there's lots of stuff in here which just made me hunger to try and find a lot of these games in the shops, and some of them I did find and some of them I wasn't so lucky in the end. Bounty Bob Strikes Back, I remember seeing that and just was desperate to try and find a copy of it, and it wasn't for another year or so until I finally found it. But it was thanks to seeing that review that when I saw it I snapped it up really quick. Yeah, so this is quite good. I used to pore over this quite a lot and just read about various games and sort of daydream about playing them and what they might be like, as well as sort of reading about ones that I already had. Not a bad magazine overall. It's only like about £1, I think, second hand. This one was a sort of it's not this exact copy. The one I've got's really rough, but me and my dad, we used to travel on the train. There used to be like bike shows that we used to go to, and he used to take me along with him for a bit of a day trip out. And there was a bike shop in London, and I remember going on the train with him, and to keep me entertained on the journey, he treated me to a magazine that was on the shelf. And on the way to a train station, we found it in a news agent, so he bought it for us, and it was great because it had a tape on the front, but the magazine itself was incredibly poor. Now this is Your Commodore, which is a very long running magazine on the 64. I think it might have even come out before Zap 64 originally in a slightly different incarnation. But this was unrecognisable to the early issues. The early issues was seen as being slightly dull, but at least they had some quality content. But at some stage the magazine got taken over by a different editorial group who seemed to be more interested in writing about music and movies that were coming out at the time rather than the 64. As you sort of flick through, there's some random content that doesn't actually mean anything at all, and it seems to be appealing more to sort of teenagers who are into into music and that, and not weren't really into games as such. It was just a bizarre magazine. I remember sort of flicking through it and not really understanding half the content. It was only about 10 at a time, and But the main thing really for me was the cover mount on this tape, and although the Football Manager game wasn't into management games, there was a Tank Battlezone game, which was a tank game done in Souk, which was not too bad. It was a restricted game. We were in this maze, so it wasn't brilliant, but it was something anyway. The main thing that really stood out for me was this Gold Train game, which was slightly odd because when you played it, it had no sound in it at all. It was completely silent. And the idea is that you control this guy on horseback and you have to protect this train from one station to another. And in a strange sort of turn of events, in later years we discovered this was actually meant to be released by Interceptor Software. And this is probably the first ever unreleased game I ever played, but sort of unwittingly without realising. But yeah, we've got in this particular one, there's a feature on virtual reality, which is Virtuality was a new company at the time doing this early days virtual reality, but nothing to do with the 64 at all. There was a cheat section which was sometimes just didn't get to cheats. It was more trying to be clever. There's a Winger's Corner thing which was just a load of shit really. Codemasters feature wasn't too bad. That was at least something sort of relevant. But as we sort of go through, you've got Post-Apocalypse who just slag all the people writing in. So you'd answer letters like Mighty Brain, but not in a so charming way. The reviews were sort of okay. Some of them were quite imbalanced. You'd get 100% reviews occasionally. So here we are. We've got a whole feature on Terminator 2, which is fair enough because that's a cover feature. But again, it's a film. You've got a film review in there, which you don't really need to put in there because it doesn't really matter. You then got reviews about comics and the Terminator 2 music, which I've got no interest in at all, really. I mean, I suppose, yeah, having a magazine covering the different interests might have worked for some people, but if you were just after a 64 magazine, then I could see most people being pissed off, and I think a lot of people were pissed off, and they lost a lot of readers as a result. Suffice to say, I looked out for the next issue, but this wasn't going to be a regular purchase. It was more just to kind of see what was going to be. Here we go, we've got 100% for 3D construction kit there, and that was quite typical of the budgie column. Not quite Roger Frames. Got an adventure section. And there we go, there's a whole section on videos and films and music. So, the magazine sort of disappeared after this. So, as I was saying, there was a strange trend. So I bought this we got this about the same time as the Zap magazine, and both magazines then disappeared, never to be seen. for a little while at least. This one I thought for years was the last ever issue because I never saw the next one, but it wasn't until years later that I discovered there was at least one more issue before it completely disappeared. Shortly, about a year after, or a couple of months later, it resurfaced under the name of Commodore Power, which only lasted for about 3 issues, but it had the exact same editorial team pretty much, and it had the same theme of covering 64 games and music and video. They're just desperate, I think, to be a music and video magazine in the end. I don't know why they just didn't leave the magazine dead and just do just that. That's clearly what they wanted to do. The magazine, exactly the same pretty much, only lasted for about 3 issues, and they recycled the cover mount content from Your Commodore as well, like no one would notice, but I did. So they had like Frosty the Snowman, which they had on previous issues, recycled again. So if you bought Your Commodore previously, I would have been really pissed off about it. But that was it. The only other magazine at the time I got was a randomly Crash magazine. So this I didn't have a ZX Spectrum at the time. Again, it was another trip up to London. My dad bought me a magazine, something to read, and this was the only magazine they pretty much had. And the reason why rather than getting sweets, I decided to get it was because of the map of. There's a Dizzy map in there somewhere of. Obviously can't find it now. So we had Dizzy Prince of the Yoke, folks. At the time, there was a Dizzy's Excellent Adventures that had come out, compilation pack, and I was playing Prince of the Yoke Folk, and again, here's another map exposing the entire game. But the rest of it, all I could do was read about the Spectrum and what games were coming out on that platform. And, this was just shortly, really, before the magazine started to really die out, and the platform as a whole disappeared. I think it had almost another year before it finally sort of disappeared, unfortunately. But so that's kind of my sort of retrospective look back at magazines. So almost at an hour, so I'll go and finish off now. It is a really fun time getting magazines. That, as I say, the main thing really was the main draw for me was the cover tapes. That was the thing, as being a sort of 9 or 10-year-old growing up back then with not much money, was that anticipation and excitement of getting a magazine every month. Was that kind of waiting for an issue to come out, and the excitement and build up of not knowing what was going to be on the tape. The internet these days, although it's such a great device for finding out new information, that's kind of replaced the need of magazines in a way, because you can find out what new games are coming out just by going on the internet quickly and seeing it. You don't need a cover tape on a magazine these days, because you can just download it straight onto your console through one of like the online PlayStation store or something like that. And it's a shame really, because although that's great and it gives you instant access to stuff, it kind of takes away a bit of the excitement for me. I kind of preferred that build up of waiting a month for something new to come out and have that excitement and almost kind of like daydreaming, imagining what might be coming out and what might be on the tape. And that's kind of lost now, unfortunately. It's something which will never come back because the times have changed. That is just something of that era and of my childhood. But it's something I look back with very fond memories, and I'm very lucky and privileged to have actually gone through that and experienced it. And it's a shame that people like new kids today won't get to kind of experience that. But then maybe they've got their own new experiences, new things which they experience, which later generations will not appreciate or enjoy. So that's just the way it is. That's how the world rotates and moves. So yeah. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that retrospective. I know that one dragged on a little bit. I hope you found something interesting in it and you haven't completely gone to sleep. I'll try and go back to sort of the normal retrospectives on games next month, but I thought I'd kind of get that out of my system really and sort of share that with you. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.